Parker Ainsworth of Locked On Cougs talking all things Houston, who is in the Final Four after knocking off Tennessee. Parker, have we proven after this one, even though a couple Big 12 teams did lose to SEC schools, have we proven that the Big 12 conference was underrated and the SEC was overall overrated during the regular season this basketball year?
I think both those statements are true, especially when you have the qualifier about overall, because I don't think anyone would knock the top handful of teams in the SEC as being very good. I certainly am not a Houston Cougar fan, and we're going to see hopefully a couple of those teams. I guess there's the two SEC teams are playing each other on one side of the Final Four. Yeah. But the bottom part of that league, I think, got a lot of props for just being in the league, whereas Houston struggled at times against West Virginia and did not struggle at all against Tennessee, right? And those are very different resumes because they're conferences. But if you just look at the head-to-head mutual opponent there, that's a pretty one-sided indicator to me as far as which one of those programs should have at least been in the tournament, let alone been like maybe a 10, 11, 12 seed.
Yeah. Are you, this was a thing that we brought up about the Big 12 conference and the SEC a couple squad shows ago. And what I'm considering currently is Florida's good, right? Auburn's good. We knew that. No one was arguing they shouldn't be in the tournament or those schools should be left out. But it was possibly overseeding for Tennessee or Texas and Oklahoma getting in. The 14 teams that they got, Vanderbilt, include them in that conversation. The 14 teams that they got didn't necessarily all deserve to be there. The problem's not the high end out of the SEC. It's those back 4 or 5 that probably should never have had a shot at the dance.
Right. And it's the same thing we argued about them in the college football playoff. It's this very similar argument, right? Where it's like no one's arguing that the top couple of teams in that conference are not good. It's that the top couple of teams in other conferences are as well. And it's that the bottom handful of teams don't get to ride coattails in that instance, like Texas or Oklahoma or Vanderbilt all did. I think that was the biggest thing that people were taking away. It's like, oh, you're bad in the SEC. It's like, I don't think that none of the teams are good. I just think there's ever been a conference in the existence of college basketball where 14 of 16 teams are big dance worthy. That just on its surface is pretty outlandish.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think we saw it with Duke and Alabama as well. That Alabama versus BYU game doesn't give you a full display of the Big 12 against the SEC, considering some nights a team makes 26 three-pointers hand in your face, right? That showcased an anomaly, a fluke in college basketball that we'd never seen before. And then Houston, who was an AAC team, beat Tennessee, the 2 seed, 69-50, almost held Tennessee in the 40s, which just would have been awesome. And they couldn't quite get it all the way there, right?
50 was so close.
50 was right there. And the 49 threshold would have been great for Houston against Tennessee. Are you scared of, let's say Houston gets past Duke, are you scared of Auburn or Florida? 2 teams that played Tennessee closer. Are you worried about them if you get to them based on what Houston just did?
So Houston's gotten so much better over the course of the season. They saw Auburn that very first weekend of the season in a non-conference. It was technically neutral floors at Toyota Center in Houston, 4-team event. So like a quarter of the stadium got sold to each school or whatever. Houston lost that game by 5. Milo Zuzan fouls out with about 5 minutes to go. Houston's a lot better team than they were then. I'm sure Auburn's going to say the same thing, but I certainly would like a rematch. I think that that's kind of the unique thing about Houston's schedule this year. They had such a challenging non-conference schedule that they were going to get to play potentially in Auburn in that title game. I'm interested in how Houston matches up with Florida because I've heard a lot about Florida throughout the latter part of the year. And you hear a lot of these teams that score a lot of points, and then they play Houston defense, and they suddenly don't score a lot of points. And I feel like that's something to keep an eye on. I think I kind of want to go watch with that matchup, and I hope to get to see it. I know that we're talking more about this Saturday soon, but I don't fear or worry about either one of them, if that's, I guess, the thought process for the SEC at this point.
Yeah. Greg Sankey has talked a lot about being the underdog, the SEC getting to be the underdog in football for the first time, and I guess he'll bring it up, I'm sure, too, for basketball, which I think is complete BS, but ESPN gets to push a narrative in football that the SEC is the best, and it only benefits ESPN. I've mentioned if you and I buy 100 shares in stock with Home Depot, we want Home Depot to succeed. That's why the big storyline with the SEC and ESPN has been so prevalent. ESPN wants them to succeed. And they cooked up SEC basketball this year. Let's send our game day to an SEC location. Let's talk about how Joe Lunardi on down, how they can get 14 teams in, and they do get 14 teams in, is the reason the SEC was so overblown this year, rooted in the way that the national media treated the conference.
I still think it helped, right? Because you're looking at a bunch of AP polls and stuff like that. And it's certainly like, if you think highly of a game at Vanderbilt and then Kentucky goes and wins by 15 at Vanderbilt, like, oh, well, that was a big time win. It's like, actually, Vanderbilt wasn't very good. But that's where that perception makes a big part of this, because it's such a big sport. There are 365 teams or whatever it is. And there are so many things to factor in that you have to go to the eye test at some point. And ultimately, if you're shading your eye test by, a handful of logos and stadiums, it can change things. I mean, the same Kentucky team that we just talked about, I just mentioned, Tennessee beat by, a decent margin in the Sweet 16, and then Houston beat Tennessee by an awful lot. Like, I don't mean to make everything the transitive property domino effect, et cetera, but like, at some point, maybe Kentucky wasn't as good as we thought they were. It's their first year with Mark Pope. Maybe the Vanderbilt, Texas, Oklahoma. I mean, those schools I don't think were any good at basketball at all. And I know Oklahoma had a good preseason, but things clearly fell apart for them at some point. You could argue West Virginia had a great pre-conference season, and things clearly fell apart for them at some point. So I don't think that I get why the ESPN would want to do it. They play the hits like anyone plays the hits, but it feels fairly contrived in a lot of ways, right? I mean, that's just the goal of what they're doing.
Yeah, the SEC does have 2 teams in the Final Four and will ultimately send one to the national championship game, considering Auburn and Florida are squaring off once again. Florida likely my dog in that race. Parker, you have any leaning on who's going to win that one in San Antonio?
Who's going to win is probably Florida. I will say, as a Houston guy, I kind of wanted Auburn. I selfishly wanted it to be Auburn, Tech, and Alabama, because I wanted a chance to play teams that had beaten Houston for like the redemption part of the story. If I'm being really honest, I wanted to be like, see, we got better. We beat those teams that beat us once upon a time. And so that's kind of what I was rooting for initially. So I want Auburn, but I think Florida's a better team.
Sounds like you just wanted to cross over with Zach Blackerby of Locked On Auburn. I think
great guy.
Probably what you're getting at. I also agree with your assessment that you mentioned.
Also, do you think that means that? I mean, what are you saying about Brandon when you say that at Florida? I mean,
Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators. I think, and the Big 12 squad has Duke in the intro, so
it's the Big 12 squad at this point.
All kind of full circle for the Big 12 with Houston and Duke this week. Speaking of, the Big 12 squad releases on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. A lot of that conversation will be dominated by Houston and their Final Four run. The next conversation we're going to go to specifically centers around Houston and Duke and what the Cougars could possibly do against America's number one team, the bracket and March Madness number one team. We will go there next. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougs crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team, and it is every day.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.